Hi, and welcome to the March of the Machine set review. Now we're talking about white cards, commons and uncommons. We're going to go in the order of grades that we agree most with, and then the second sub-order is cards from the cheapest to the more expensive ones. I'm Sherkovitz, and my co-host today is Trumpetman.
Hello.
And let's start with Surge of Salvation. Surge of Salvation, 1 mana, 1 white, instant. You and the permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. Prevent all damage that black and red sources would deal to creatures you control this turn. That's a set in this. That's a how is it called cycle in this format of cards that host the opposing colors. This one is looking pretty decent. You gain hexproof. Your permanents gain hexproof. So even if someone doesn't play red and black, it can counter a removal spell, or it can counter a discard spell aimed at you. But in some situations, if you play against black and red opponents, you can very much change the outcome of a combat situation. However, this type of card will also be at some parts of the game completely dead. You won't be able to do anything with it, and you will feel like you're mulliganed yourself to 6 naturally. So there is a drawback of playing this card. I gave it a C, you gave it a C. I think we agreed that the card is situational. I think playable in the main deck, but you probably shouldn't pick it too highly, in best of one at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree on all that.
Let's move on.
Our next one is Angelic Intervention. 1 and a white for an instant at common. It says target creature or planeswalker you control gains protection from colorless or from the color of your choice until end of turn. If it's a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And so anything that gives protection and also giving that counter lets you help win a combat, but also beef up your creature moving forward in the game. These are the types of combat tricks which it's not just a one-time effect, but also it is cheap enough where you're going to be able to kind of actually hold up this maybe in response to a removal spell on the opponent's turn, or if you have all your mana untapped and you're attacking your opponent, you're helping to win a combat, but then also continue to attack on the next turns. It's a lot like Feat of Resistance, very, very similar card. And so we both gave it a C+. We're thinking, hey, not really going to be in that B range, but these types of combat tricks historically, unless they had keyword soup, we're kind of at the C+ level. Not quite as good as maybe Gaia's Gift or Take Up the Shield from similar past sets, but not that much worse.
I mean, arguably, it's going to be also the +1/+1 counter synergy.
Absolutely.
In some cases.
Yeah, and green-white, it'll be even better. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think it's a great card. I'm going to be playing the hell out of it. And yeah. There you go. She made her guest appearance. Carefully planned it when I was not looking. Okay, next card, Realmbreaker's Grasp. 1 and a white for enchantment aura, enchant artifact or creature, enchanted permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can be activated unless they are mana abilities. So it's an arrest that is a better arrest and cheaper arrest. So technically a great card. Couple of knocks against it. I'm not a big fan of pacifism effects. I still gave it a C+, which is which means I have high hopes for that card, because normally I will put my pacifism effect at C-C. So I think this is a good one. A couple of knocks against it is that there is a main deckable enchantment removal in this format, which makes it slightly weaker. And also there's some bounce, there's some sacrifice synergies, but still against some deck it's going to be as good as a removal spell for 2 mana, which is great. And against some deck it's going to be a big nuisance for them, which is just enough for me to give it a C+.
Yeah, definitely agree on that. We did see Planar Disruption in the last set getting to that B- range, but it also could deal with Planeswalkers, which were big problems in the set. This one doesn't really necessarily deal with like battles or other things, or not all your problems. So C+. Next up, we have Sunder the Gateway. 1 and a white for sorcery at common. Choose one. Destroy target non-token artifact or enchantment opponent controls and incubate 2. So this is the answer to the card we just talked about. Or incubate 2, then transform an incubator token you control. A lot going on this card. Having those main deck answers to artifacts and enchantments, super nice. Some of the really powerful battles transform into these enchantments, which can take over the game. So being able to answer that is pretty fantastic. Or also, of course, artifacts taking over the game. Now, it does say non-token, So you're not going to be able to kill like a giant Phyrexian with this card, but it does do different things. And then playing on the Phyrexian side of things, it's kind of cool that you could like incubate 2, and if you had like, an incubate 4 token sitting around, you could flip that one and suddenly, attack for 4 with your Sunder the Gateway. All in all, I mean, that just adds up to a C. We both agree on that. It just does a lot of little things really nicely, and you'll be happy to have it in your white decks.
That's basically should be a G-Guards Invitational card. I mean, it's a vanilla 2/2 that can do other things when situation is just right. No, I think I totally agree with that. It's just a solid card because it has this failsafe and the upside is there. We'll see exactly how the format plays out, how important those artifacts and enchantments are going to be, because you can also kill the other incubate tokens. Next, we have Swordsworn Cavalier. 1 and a white for human knight, 3/1, and it has first strike as long as another knight entered the battlefield under your control this turn. I think that I give it a C. I might be swayed very quickly, at least in the early days of the format, that this is actually a C plus in some decks. Because a 3/1 is a decent body. I always like this stat. I prefer 2 mana 3/1 from a 3 mana 3/2 anytime. Giving it first strike makes decisions for the opponent very bad. So imagine that you played this one on turn 2. On turn 3, you play the 3 mana battle that makes a 2/2 vigilant knight. This one gets a first strike. You attack the battle. I can guarantee you that opponent doesn't have blockers that can withstand the 3/1 first striker. So they either chump or they let you deal 3 damage and bring you closer to flipping the battle and giving your creature an anthem, which is a great start. And I think there's going to be plenty of other starts that this can push damage very early. And even in the late game, it becomes an important card. The only problem with it, and I think that that's why the grade is a C in my case, is that this card is just not so great defensively. And maybe there's also a couple of ways of hosing X1 creatures.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. The only thing I'll add is like I think sitting C in the middle is nice because we talk about grading it based on what we think will reflect in the 17 line data. I do think it probably will be like a C plus in white blue because you have all these night synergies. But when every time it gets played in like a white green deck randomly or a white black deck that wants Phyrexians or whatever else, then you're gonna be like, it's gonna bring the win rate down. So I think overall we end at a C, but just know that it definitely you want to play into those synergies. Otherwise, the card just isn't that good.
Yeah. Also, I mean, caveat for those that didn't watch from the start: C's in our book are actually not bad cards. Some really decent playable is a C.
All right. Next we have Invasion of Belenon. 2 and a white for battle. It's uncommon. And when Invasion of Belenon enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance, and it has defense 5. So pairs really nice with the knight we just talked about. Has that curve out, so that's mentioned. On the backside, if you defeat those 5 defense points, you get Belenon War Anthem. It's an enchantment that says creatures you control get +1/+1. So super busted if you have, a nice curve out and turn all your creatures even bigger for the rest of the game. For that reason, we gave it that B- grade. Now, 3 mana 2/2 vigilance is below rate these days. So I think you do need to build with that in mind or have a lot of night synergies for this card to really excel. Because if you can't flip the card reliably, it's actually like really quite bad. So you want to be thinking like, where are my spots? Can I hold off on playing this to surprise do like a battle and flip my whole team, or flip the battle to the backside and pump my whole team? So it's going to have some interesting gameplay scenarios some games, or you curve out and you flip it, and that's pretty obvious. But B- for this one, we're saying.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the art, I love the theme, and that's basically it. Next one is Invasion of Dominaria. So I also will have a lot to read. 2 and a white, 5 defense, battle siege. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 4 life and draw a card. And it flips into a Serra Angel. Well, Serra Faithkeeper, but it's a 4/4 flying vigilance angel, so basically a Serra Angel. I gave it a C plus. I think that these 2 invasions are a perfect example of 2 completely different styles in invasion. So this one, for me, is a card that is a very good card in a controlling deck. You gain some life, you draw a card. You probably don't want to curve out with this thing. You want to play it slightly later in the game. You accrue some advantage. Maybe you have a couple of evasive threats that can nibble on it and bring it down to 0. You got the Sarah Angel, and that can be your win con, basically. And because you gained 4 life and you drew a card, you gain time to do stuff that you want to be doing in your deck, which is playing the long game because you have some bombs, because you have controlling elements in it and stuff like that. I gave it a C+. I think it can be pretty solid. Not as good as the previous one, I think, but and not played in the same deck, that's for sure. I wouldn't put it in my Knights deck. I would put it in my some kind of maybe red, white, blue control of some sorts, if that exists, or something like that.
Yeah, it seems like a white-black card maybe, or one of those like splishy splash decks where they are slower, and maybe you're playing like some green-based slow deck that you just happen to splash this and then flip it that way. Though it is kind of funny if you're playing white-black, you invade Dominaria with the Phyrexians, but then the Sarah Angel comes to join your side. That's kind of messed up.
Cosmic
Flavor-wise.
Cosmic Hawk asks, do they ever give different grades? So we arrange the cards by the grades, and the first cards we're reading, we agree on them, and then the further we go in each color, the more they go different ways. Okay.
All right. So our next one, Scroll Shift. 2 and a white for an instant common. Exile up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control, and most importantly, draw a card. So we get a flicker effect, but it is expensive. And so maybe you could save a creature, but I find anytime you have these combat tricks or like save a creature trick for 3 mana, it's very, very difficult to hold up 3 mana to be able to do that. Now, if you do get very tricksy and you had like a flipped battle that turns into a creature and then you turn it back to the battle side and you can kind of get more value off of that, you can do some pretty like wacky, crazy things with the Scroll Shift. That being said, at the end of the day, we just both gave it a D because while it has some cool synergies, it's just clunky as hell. And so not much more to say about that.
Yeah, I gave it a D because I think that the card will have a potential deck around it, and it's going to be a strong deck. There is a 4 mana green creature that incubates 5, and flipping that, it's a 0/1 that incubates 5. So basically, blinking this is great because you get another 5/5 out of it. And there are a couple of other things that do similar things, and that's going to be great with those. I just think that this is a type of a card that people will be jamming in their decks, and that will lower its win rate. So yeah, I think that it's a good card in a very specific niche deck that has very powerful ETB effects, and you blink for that. This deck will come together once every 50 to 100 drafts. So maybe you will draft it once in a format, and most of the time the card is going to be misplayed, which is going to lower its win rate.
Well said.
Seal from Existence. I have the easy one. 1 white enchantment with ward 3. When Sealed from Existence enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Seal from Existence leaves the battlefield. So it's an Oblivion Ring with ward 3, which means that they will have to pay probably at least 5 mana to get rid of it, which in lots of cases will not going to be worth the effort, which means it's basically a permanent removal for 3 mana. In my book, since it can deal with any type of permanent, maybe except for battle. No, any permanent. It's a B. That's it. Very good on rate. Does everything. Done.
Yeah, I just kind of want to shout out a point of comparison in the past. Like Ossification is at that B level, so this card is very similar to that. Costs 1 mana more, but it has the ward 3 protection built in, so it's pretty much going to be the same type of card. Next up, we have Serif of New Capenna. 2 and a white for a 2/2 Angel Soldier at uncommon. It, of course, has flying, so we're getting a Windrake. But it also has 4 and a Phyrexian black mana to transform it, and you can only do this as sorcery. So you could pay 4 and 2 life, or 4 and a black, to turn it into Serif of New Phyrexia, which is a 3/3 Phyrexian Angel on the back. It also has flying, of course. And whenever it attacks, you may sacrifice another creature or artifact. If you do, Serif of New Phyrexia gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So it turns into this kind of like Fallen Angel type card when you can attack with it. We both gave this card a C. I think you just need a lot for your Windrakes these days. In general, like a Windrake, I kind of put at like a D+ level. So that's why, it's not a D+. We're at a C because it does have that upside. And the thing is, though, it's just a lot of mana to be able to flip. You have to kind of choose your spots with this card. Also, it's a sorcery. If it ever gets interrupted, like it gets, removed or bounced or whatever after you've done all that work, you've sort of invested a lot into this card. So I think on these transform cards, you got to be careful with them, because if you spend, 7, 8, 9 mana over the course of a few turns with some of these, and it does get answered, like, you better have gotten some good work in with it while it was hitting. And that certainly can be the case. Now, obviously, the normal play pattern with this card is going to be, it's going to be kind of like in play, it's going to be pecking away. You land a battle, and then maybe the next turn, or on a previous turn, you flipped it, you play the battle, and then you attack, sacrifice when you have a clean attack, and the 5 damage from this right away might flip the battle immediately. And it works very nice with that. But also you kind of need to be in more of an aggressive color pair, which I don't necessarily think white black is, although it does have the whole sacrifice synergies going on. So if you have a bunch of incubate tokens, maybe you sacrifice some of those to just kill your opponent very quickly. It does a lot of small things. And if you play the card well and think about sort of the trajectory of the game, do you have time to transform it, you can make the C work. But also a lot of times it's just not going to be enough.
Yeah, just one comment. Whenever I see those new transform with Phyrexian mana costs, I just see 4. I don't see the other part. I just, like, in my head, it costs 4 to flip. Although you can pay 5 if you want to. But yeah, I mean, it's a C. I'm gonna play it probably in some decks. I'm not gonna be super happy to do it. It's gonna be fine. Sigil Sentinel. 2 and a white, creature human knight, backup 1, vigilance. Elegant, simple. We talked about this card when we gave the example of what backup does in the multicolor part of the review. I think it's a very neat card. I gave it a C+, and you agreed with it. It has knight synergies. It has +1/+1 counter synergies. It is a vigilant card, which allows you to attack battles and defend on the backswing at the same time. Neat, simple, and good, I think.
Yeah, let's try not to talk about that one too long. I do want to just quickly point out, I think like the 3 mana 3/3s with upside, that is kind of the C+ now. Whereas we need a lot more for like 2 mana 2/2s these days. But like 3/3 is just like great stats still. So that's all. Next up, we have Zhalfirin Lancer. Speaking of 3/3s with great stats, this is 2 and a white for 3/3 human knight at uncommon. And whenever another knight enters the battlefield under your control, Zhalfirin Lancer gets +1/+1 and gains vigilance until end of turn. Of course, I was kind of bearing the lead here. It's not a 3 mana 3/3, it's a 3 mana 4/4, which, hey, even better. That is a rate monster, right? You play this and you have your knight, and also it doesn't trigger once per turn. Like if you get 2 knights into play, maybe with a 4 mana knight that brings along a buddy, you might be attacking with a 5/5 here. So we both gave this a B-. I mean, it just has stats. And I think one of my big mistakes in the one review was I underrated. There was the 3/3 menace for 3, the Furnace Punisher. And it basically was just, that's all it was, 3/3 menace for 3. I was like, how good is that really? It was nice, right? Just having big creatures counts for a lot these days. And so I'm not going to make the same mistake. B- for this one.
Yeah, I totally agree with it. It's this card is going to be menacing if you are starting the game, because bashing with the 5/5 or a 4/4 vigilant thing, especially when there are battles involved, is going to be amazing. And if there is face involved, that's also pretty menacing. So yeah. All right, now we go to the cards where we have slight disagreement. So we changed the grade. We have different grade by half a point or 1/3 of a point, whatever, by 1 grade. And the first one is Enduring Bond Warden. White for a human scout. It's a 0/1, but it has backup 1. And it has also an ability: when this creature dies, put its counters on target creature you control. So you can basically play it as a 1-drop. It's a 1/2, and when it dies, its +1/+1 counter will go on something else. Or you can play it as a 0/1 and put this 1 counter on something else to maybe enable attacks, to maybe enable flipping of the battle, or offer a trade where you know that part of that trade will be that you're going to get back this +1/+1 counter on something else. Again, this is going to have much more significant synergies in the counters deck than in anything else, I think. But it has some abilities that are relevant. It's a 1-drop, I think, pretty serviceable. I gave it a C. You gave it a C-. I think it's going to play like a C. I'm going to stick with my grade here.
Yeah, I'll come up on it for you. I think the only bad place for it is probably in white blue, because I was thinking about more of the color pairs, and the more we think about the set and talk about it, it's like obviously we get better at the grading as we go along, because we had all these written ahead of time. And in fact, of course, we had them written down before we even checked each other's notes on anything to keep things fair. I will say, I think in white red, if you have some of the backup enablers, this is a backup creature, although the 0/1 body is a little bit finicky. In white-black, I think this being a sacrifice enabler where you can actually use the backup ability to good effect, where you can get a good clean attack in and then maybe, sacrifice your 2/2, which is now a 3/3 for some benefit, and then move the counter because it still has the backup. Like, you can engineer some pretty tricky situations with it, and then I think in white-green is just a clearly good card. So it only having one bad home across the 4 white color pairs is pretty nice. So I'll join you on C on this one. But the reason I originally said C minus is that I think this card can be played incorrectly a lot of times, because as a 1/2, it's not very much going on with it unless you have Convoke kind of going on. So it's the type of 1-drop you actually often don't want to play on turn 1, which is kind of weird, unless you just need to. And because the backup ability is only temporary, right? Where, yes, you give the +1/+1 counter, but then that creature dying to move that counter only triggers on that first turn. And then if it goes away, you no longer have that ability sticking around. It's mostly just a 1 mana. You're giving a +1/+1 counter somewhere, and you have this little kind of trinkety card sitting around. All that being said, I do think you're right. I think it is a C. But it's just like a very nuanced, tricky 1-drop going on here.
I see also Lucius Annius has a good point that you can actually put the first +1/+1 counter on an incubated Phyrexian. And this one already has some +1/+1 counters. So if you manage to get attack with this one or make it trade, then you get like 3 counters to move on something else that improves it quite significantly. There's also the 1-drop in black that you can combine it with, where you back up this and it gains an ability to sacrifice it to draw a card, and you can put a counter on this, sacrifice it, draw a card, move the counter somewhere else, and pass the buck like this. So it's going to be very finicky, and I think it's going to be leading to some very interesting plays. And I don't think that this card will have like a big. There won't be a situation when it feels terrible to draw it, basically.
All right, our next one we have slight disagreement on is Tarkir Dune Shaper. Single white mana for a 1/2 dog warrior at common. And it has 4 and a Phyrexian green to transform it. And what does it transform into? It becomes a Burnished Dune Stomper, which is a 4/3 trample Phyrexian dog warrior. So a 1 mana 1/2, it kind of sits there, maybe does some things, maybe convokes, does all this nonsense, and eventually you can pay 4 mana and turn it into a 4/3 trample, pay some life, but you're beating down pretty well. The thing about it is, again, it's a lot of mana to turn it into that 4/3 trample. Now it does kind of have haste because it's already in play, right? Where before, if you have the 4 or 5 mana sitting around, you get your 4/3 trample going. But I don't also know how synergistic is that. It's not at night. It doesn't play with counters anywhere other than maybe it does well at getting the counters. It kind of could be something you could sacrifice. Now, it's nice with Convoke, but Convoke isn't always going to be what's going on in white anyways. All in all, it just seems like a fine card. So I gave it a C, but I don't know any like clear direction you want to go with this card.
So NCAA in the chat says it's going to be a B- at least. Now, NCAA is known for hot takes, but also those hot takes are pretty often right. I also didn't read it's a dog, so if I knew it's a dog, I would have given it a half a grade up anyway. So I think C is pretty decent. I gave it a C- because I see that a 1/2 for 1 is maybe not as impactful in this set, because this set has slightly bigger butts than normal sets, and the 1 is not as threatening as it might seem. And 5 mana to transform, or 4 mana and 2 life to transform, is again something that is useful, but it flips into something with 3 toughness. And I think that for me, the main thing that I didn't like about it is the 3 toughness that the opponent knows is coming. So you will spend some mana to flip it, and there is plenty of good removal that can deal 3 damage. That was one of the knockbacks against the card that I had. Oh, my turn. Aerial Boost. 1 and a white, instant. It has Convoke. Instant with Convoke is good, but maybe this one is not particularly good because it's a combat trick, so you can't do it end of turn. You can, but why? Why would you? Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. I think that this is a okay combat trick. The Convoke can make it surprising in blocks and dealing with opposing flyers, but it has some offensive potential in being able to send something in the air and kill a battle if the opponent does not have anything with reach or with flying. And I think that this is the main thing I'm going to be trying to use it. I know there's at least several of the white battles or white containing battles that you want to flip offensively. And I think that sending one creature in the air and wasting a card to flip a battle is going to be beneficial at some stage. That's why I give it a C-.
Okay, agree with all of that. The reason I gave it a D+ instead was I disagree with the last statement. I don't think it'll be worth a card usually to be able to kill a battle. And so if that's where we're on the difference in that grade. And also I think there's a lot of just a lot better tricks in the set. Like there's actually quite a few of them. Some of them are quite good. We've already seen the one we said was a C+, the like take ups in the shield variant or whatever. But okay. White combat trick. Play it when you need it. Next, we have Norn's Inquisitor. 1 and a white for a 1/1 Phyrexian Knight at uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, incubate 2. And whenever a permanent you control transforms into a Phyrexian, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, this is pretty clunky, right? Because you're paying 2 mana for a 1/1 up front. Don't love that. But you do get that 2/2. And if you flip it the next turn immediately, you're getting a 3/3 for 2 mana on turn 3. And that's actually a really good deal because you have that extra 1 mana to do something with it. And it works for everything moving forward too, because this acts as kind of a lord for all your Phyrexians. It's a Phyrexian itself. Again, it's 2 pieces of cardboard. Maybe you flip some things, and obviously you want to play it maybe in white-black where you have a lot of Phyrexians and sacrifice things. You could sacrifice this when it's no longer useful because it's just a 1/1. So just a lot going on with this card. For all those reasons, I gave it a B-.
I gave it a C+, mainly because I considered the failsafe. Like, I imagined it in my head like this, that I pay 2 mana, I get a 1/1. I pay another 2 mana, I get a 3/3. That's basically a split version of a classic common, a 3/3 that comes home with a 1/1. Now, of course, the 1/1 has additional ability, and if I manage to flip several other permanents, I'm in the money for that one. The question is, what are the odds that the opponent is not going to focus their removal on the Norn's Inquisitor as early as possible? Because the earlier they kill it, the less benefit I'm getting. Because if they kill it on the first turn after it comes into play, I'm left with a 2/2 incubate token that I need to still pay mana to flip.
Aren't you really happy with that though? If it's a lightning rod, these types of cards, like, isn't that like
I'm
classic,
happy.
like limited being good, where they're like answer this or like I'm gonna accrue value over the whole game?
I'm happy. I'm C+ happy.
Okay, well I'm B- happy. And let's also just point out briefly that any of those random creatures that have the transform abilities do transform into Phyrexian, so they're also going to get the counters too.
That is nice. True. It's my turn, yeah?
Yeah, your turn.
Sunblessed Guardian. 1 and a white for a 2/2 human cleric. And it has 5 and Phyrexian red, transform Sunblessed Guardian, activate only as a sorcery. So 5 mana and 2 life, or 6 mana and 1 of them has to be red. And then it flips into Furnace Blessed Conqueror. That's a creature, Phyrexian cleric. Whenever Furnace Blessed Conqueror attacks, create a tapped and attacking token that is a copy of it. Put a +1/+1 counter on that token for each +1/+1 counter on Furnace Blessed Conqueror. Sacrifice that token at the beginning of the next end step. That's a mouthful. What it happens is basically, if it's flipped, you attack with it, it creates another 3/3. Unless you had a counter on it, which means that it creates a 4/4, or if you have 2 counters on it, it creates a 5/5. The problem with me for this card is that it's a vanilla 2/2 when you play it. It doesn't have any other ability, doesn't have first strike, doesn't have vigilance, doesn't have flying, doesn't whatever. Which makes it pretty mild, and it stays this vanilla creature for a long time because it takes 5 or 6 mana to flip it. So it doesn't have any impact on board when you play it early. And then when you flip it, if you had some +1/+1 counters on it, it's fine because you have quite a lot of power and toughness out of it. But you paid 6 mana to transform it, so it better bring something. And because this power and toughness is split across multiple bodies, you deal with the Sunblessed Guardian, and it takes away all of it. So it basically can be single blocked by a 3/3 or a 2/2, and you lose a 3/3 or a 4/4, and you lose the whole power of this card while you invested so much mana in it. And also it has counter synergies, but it's technically a white-red card, which means that it's best in the color that doesn't have counter synergies that much.
Yeah, I just think that I agree with everything you're saying, and I think the backside is kind of nice, but it's just a 2 mana 2/2 for most of the game, which again I think is just like a D plus level card. So basically, I'm coming up from D plus because I'm acknowledging that the backside is powerful, but I don't really want to rumble with the 2/2 that much because I traded off, and then all it was a 2/2, which is fine. I don't need to expect that much more from my 2 drop. But also the backside, while being good, I mean, you get to duplicate it. If it's just a 3/3, all they have to do is trade with the original, right? The copy will get through once, and then this is gone. So
Yeah, I
it's not
think
that
we're
great.
saying the same. It's just I
Yeah,
evaluated on a C because I think I admit that there's a minor amount of synergies.
it's
Like
pretty
with the
nice with backup, right? Of course, you get the counters
yeah,
on it, and you're
yeah.
attacking with all that. But it's also kind of like all your eggs are on this because you're incentivized, like pile on the counters, and then if they do deal with this, it's like you're kind of getting double punished for doing so. I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe.
Card seems okay.
We'll see how it plays out. I'm pretty sure, yeah, it's gonna be in that bracket that we described, somewhere in the main bulk of the
C minus
playable
plus
but not exciting cards.
between them. Our next card is Phyrexian Awakening. It's 2 and a white for an enchantment and uncommon. When it enters the battlefield, incubate 4, and Phyrexians you control have vigilance. Woo, we got a whammy here, don't we? So for 3 mana, incubating 4 is a lot. Now, of course, you get nothing up front other than maybe a creature gets vigilance. Maybe you get to attack and block in the same turn. That's sweet. But I kind of was thinking of this more as what happens when you play this with 5 mana, because in that spot you're curving out. You played a different 3 drop on 3, and then on turn 5 you play this and you have the extra 2 mana, and maybe a couple other creatures, like I said, have vigilance at that point, which is kind of nice. But like 5 mana 4/4 with a ton of upside that also enables all the other synergies with the Phyrexians, incubating, and whatever other Phyrexian you have. I think like we get these enchantment lords here that give these extra abilities. I had mentioned how I think flying gets like the biggest boost in this set overall, but I actually think like vigilance is one of the mechanics that gets one of the biggest boosts relative to limited in general. Like here, being able to attack and block is huge at being able to protect your own battles while attacking your opponent's battles. All that being said, I gave it a B because I think this card is going to be pretty sweet.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would like to see how much of the Phyrexian trunk can you assemble during the drafts and get those extra small bonuses that will boost your creatures quite greatly. And how good is that kind of combination of cards going to be? Because we saw already the +1/+1. There's a vigilance, there's a reach one, there's a couple of others, I think. So it's interesting. I evaluated exactly like you said, as a 5 mana for vigilance that has some additional bonuses incorporated in it, and I graded it B minus, but I think it's just so close in our grading systems between B minus and B that it can be either, depending on the strength of the archetype.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Okay, here we have another card that we have a slight difference in. Phyrexian Censor, 2 and a white creature, Phyrexian wizard. Each player can't cast more than one non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. And it's a 3/3. And for me, it's a 3/3 with a huge upside if you put it in the right deck. That's why I gave it a B minus, because double spelling is super important in the modern limited, and if you switch the ability to double spell for your opponent off, and you can still perfectly find the double spell because you have a right density of Phyrexian creatures, and you can play as many Phyrexian spell as you can, and also one non-Phyrexian spell. Yeah, that's pretty decent. And also the fact that the non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped is going to make your race much easier in that kind of deck. I mean, I think that the card should be mainly white, black. Maybe there is some kind of white, green Phyrexian kind of decks, but I think it's going to be very strong in those decks. And I think that people will sort of realize that you want to have a right density of Phyrexians and play it accordingly, and that will bring it to B minus. You might be thinking that they will put it as a vanilla 3/3, and maybe play it in the decks that they shouldn't, and it will drop the win rate.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking when I graded it, and I was sort of taking it in the aggregate rather than being as like only being played in probably like white black. I think in white black you're right, where it's like it's always working for you, but not always, like it's kind of punishing your opponent, but never punishes you. I think in those circumstances, I agree, like totally B minus on board, and it has good stats. I'm just a little bit concerned that like you don't always necessarily have control over it, like because sometimes it's great, but sometimes it's literally just a 3 mana 3/3, and so like that's just not that impressive.
Worst case scenario, it's a 3 mana 3/3 that also makes your creatures enter the battlefield tapped.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Just the classic F. But I think overall, I mean, I don't know. The way you described, I was like, yeah, I think you're right with B minus. And then like the more I talked about when it kind of does balance it out. So maybe I think I'll stick with my C plus. But I think if you build around this card, it's going to perform well. Okay, our next one is Bola Slinger. 3 and a white for a 2/2 cat soldier at common. It has backup 1. So again, put the counter on itself or another creature. If you put on the other creature, that creature gets, whenever this creature attacks this turn, tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls. And of course, this creature has that permanently. I'm a huge fan of backup overall because I think it gives a lot of flexibility. And usually you're not paying a ton for the rate, where like here, you're basically getting a hill giant, but you can move around one of the 1/1 to wherever you need it. And the fact that suddenly this can come out of nowhere and enable attacks where your opponent's not expecting it because one more thing is tapped than they thought is pretty nice. But also, you do need to really consider paying for that. As I say this, I think I probably graded this card a little harshly. I said C minus, and I think you said C. I think it probably is closer to C than C minus when we think about this, because you're trying to always get to keep pressure going because your opponent's always going to try to keep you from attacking them with battles, but also just like winning races, etc. And this is going to play pretty nicely in most spots. I will say, like, the one thing holding it back is 4 mana for the creature sizing itself, right? Only being a 3/3 overall is pretty small, but it is a pretty powerful effect. So
Yeah,
actually, I like C on it, actually.
but then I definitely agree, because that's what grade I gave it. I wonder if they're trying to pun us into thinking that Bolas is coming back because it's a Bola Slinger. Who knows
Well,
with what
Leonin
he
Bola,
puns?
right? This is a Leonin throwing a Bola, and it taps things. This is a callback
But there's
to.
Bolas hidden in it. You see,
Oh, I see. Bolas. Well, what's a linger? We
when
is
it
Lingering Souls
lingers,
coming back? We must linger on
maybe.
this thought. No more. Please move on.
Yeah, but yeah, again, I agree with what you said about the card. Golden Scale Aeronaut, 4 and a white for a 2/3 dwarf pilot. It has backup 1 and it has flying. So 5 mana, 2/3 flyer that can send something into the air, or 3/4 flyer for 5, which is not exciting stat line. You gave it a D plus, I gave it a C minus. I think we mean exactly the same. This card is like below rate. Probably I should lower it to D plus actually.
I think this card kind of looks like it's that one aeronaut cavalry from Brothers War, but that was a 3/4 already and then gave the counter. So like totally different ball game. And I think if this card like jumped something in the air and like, oh, you're a flyer now, hey, awesome, then I agree. It's like it would be in the C camp. But the fact that you get the one-time shot at the flying, maybe that's enough to flip the battle and it was worth the card, but you're left with a 2/3 flyer massively overcosted. So that's kind of why it's in the D range for me. Okay, our next one, Infected Defector. That's a fun one to say. 4 and a white for a 4/3 Phyrexian Knight at common, and when it dies, incubate 3. So pretty simple card. I just think it's a lot of value where it's going to be a 2-for-1 a lot of time. Now, obviously, you have to pay a lot of mana to get this kind of underpowered card into play, and then eventually get 3/3 when you invest the mana on the Phyrexian. But that being said, like that's, I think, something some decks will be interested in. And it kind of plays well in any style of deck, right? Because in the aggro decks, it lets you keep pressuring. The mid-range deck is a classic mid-range card, and it kind of in the controlling decks, it allows you to trade but still have things. I think it's probably worst in like the control decks because you already get so much value from other places. You just want to protect your life total. You don't want to lose your board. So this kind of fits better, I think, as like kind of more of the top end that the decks let you just keep attacking. But all in all, I mean, that's just a role player. It's gonna kind of be fine like in any deck because it's a Phyrexian, it's a knight, it does all these things. It can be in whatever deck. It has +1/+1 counters and sacrifice things and it knights and blah blah blah. I see. C for me. You said C minus.
Yeah, just like I think that for the controlling deck that you mentioned, I think it's a bit too small ball because it's like, yeah, it will trade with something. They can play around it quite efficiently. I think if they do. Free toughness is again something that I'm watching because I think that the inflection part in terms of toughness power is at 4 in this format. So that's my problem with it. And yeah, aggressively, it's a 5 mana 4/3. That's not powerful enough.
That part's true.
Okay, here we have a card where we have a big disagreement. I think after hindsight, maybe I should upgrade it to C+, but it's Core Halberd. White for equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance, equip 1. It's a short sword with a big upside. And I like the card. I'm going to play a lot of it. I gave it a C. Possibly should have given it a C+, but I think also that equipment, based on how we grade the cards, which means how we predict people are going to play it, I think that those cards also get very often played incorrectly, and therefore they are going to have a slightly lower win rate. And I think that here I gave this C grade not because of the strength I perceive of the card, but of how it's going to play out in some decks where people put it in places where it shouldn't be played in.
Yeah, this is probably one of my like hottest takes for the set, but I think this card is like one of the most pushed commons like for equipment that we've seen in a really long time. Now, obviously, it doesn't come with a body, so it has all the inherent problems with equipment traditionally. Like you do need the creatures to back it up. But like basically every card practically in the set is like a creature or a battle that turns into a creature, or like just there's a million creatures, right? I've talked about how I think vigilance is huge in this format. And if you attack and make it bigger, your opponent has to deal with it either on attacks or blocks, right? The biggest way to get around equipment is to never trade with the creature that has equipment on it, because then they're just accruing value over time. But when a creature has vigilance, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to engage on that axis with the card. It's also incredibly cheap. So I think this card is actually going to be a lot closer to Bone Splitter levels than not. And so that's why it's like super hot take. And I think it's going to be like amazing in the white decks. A B- for a common is like pretty aggressive, but I'm going to stand by it.
Fair.
All right, not a B- here. We got Alabaster Host Sanctifier. 1 and a white for a 2/2 Phyrexian Cleric. A common has lifelink. Now, these cards have always kind of overperformed. The 2/2 lifelink have always been pretty good. This set, I think, board presence and staying on board is maybe more important than the race and the life total, because being able to consistently attack is more important than winning races. Whereas, like, I think if this card existed in like Phyrexia would be 1. Now we're talking, because it's just life total is the only thing that matters. But when you care about battles, you know, trying to win the battles and then the war, so to speak, is really much more, I think, what it's about here. So for that reason, I think the stats just aren't enough for me for the lifelinker, although these cards have historically overperformed. So I'm going a little bit lower on it with a C-, but you respect this card secrets, you're giving it the C+. I can respect that based on precedent. And
So I also I agree with your analysis that this card is going to be weaker here than it was before because the game is not about pure racing. But I also am thinking about this card as a sort of enabler of slower decks, where this is the format when you sort of start on 24 life because people would try to attack battles most of the time. And the extra 2 life, even if it just chumps one time, is going to push you so far into the life total department where you gained enough time to play your long game. And that's how I put it. But of course, I might be very wrong because people are going to play it in very aggressive decks, and therefore it's going to be not utilized as I think it probably should be. And maybe that will drop the win rate. Obviously, it's very hard to guess where people are going to put those cards in which type of decks and how it's going to play out.
it is real good with all the backup and stuff going on, so I'll give it that.
That's true.
But if you can
That's
pump this
true.
card, it's nasty.
All right. Attentive Skywarden, 2 and a white creature Phyrexian core. It's a 2/2 with flying, so a wind drake. But it has another ability. Whenever Attentive Skywarden deals combat damage to a player or battle, transform up to 1 target incubator token you control. You gave it a C-, I gave it a C+. I gave it an optimistic C+, where I'm sort of trying to think of the card as I played on turn 3. On turn 4, I play an incubate card and swing with it and flip, and I get 2 mana, and that's enough to put it as a C+. And I think that there's this is going to be a scenario that is not uncommon to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. If you're able to set up that line, this card is going to perform well. But anytime you don't set up that line, again, it's that Windrake, and I pretty much stand by like Windrakes being in the D category, probably D pluses. And
Yeah,
so
no,
this has
I
a
think
little
that
bit better,
yeah.
C minus. I like that. Like we saw the enchantment earlier, where it's like comes in, incubate 4, it costs 3 mana. Can you imagine like you play this, your opponent had a Windrake, you play the 0-1 backup, you make this a 3-3, your opponent can't block now, you flip your thing into a 4-4, and like you're off to the races. So there are going to be scenarios where like this card way overperforms. But if you ever have to play defense with it, it's horrible. And if your opponent ever also could just like randomly block it or have reach creatures or flyers of their own, then it doesn't work if like creature combat happens. It's only players in battles. So I feel like it's kind of like a win more. Now, when it does work, you are going to win more often. And so, maybe that does mean it's more of like that C rather than C minus or C plus. But we'll kind of have to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I think I would put it at C, but I put it plus based on the fact that flying is also useful for winning battles. That's basically it. So I mean, Windrake is slightly better in this set for me than it was in other sets.
That is probably true. All right. We have Kithkin Belly Rider. I like this one because Lauren is just a fun place. Although maybe not once it's Shadowmoor. So this is 2 and a white for a 1/3 Kithkin Knight at common, and it has double strike. Now the card looks pretty anemic because 3 mana 1/3 is really bad, but double strike does mean it's closer to a 2/3. And I don't hate a 2/3. But it's 2/3 and it's better than a 2/3 because any combat tricks, counters, whatever allows this to really go up. But I do like the fact this is a knight. We have seen ways to give like knights +1/+1. I do love it with backup because if you ever get this to be a 2/4 double striker, like that's big game. Now like your opponent really can't deal with that very effectively. So for a common, actually, it has a lot of good synergy pieces here. If you don't do anything with this card, it's going to be like pretty bad. That's why I rated a C minus here. But I think there are enough things that if you can build kind of around it, which is a funny thing to say because it's a common, then it really can outperform that and be like quite a bit better. So you said C plus. I can totally see where you're coming from with it.
Yeah, I gave it a C plus because I don't think you need to build around it. It just naturally fits with so many synergies that will make it a 2/4. Because there's plenty of counters things. There is the Night Lords. There is a bunch of whatever tricks. So I think that this is going to be a scary card, and I think that it will have some.
Yeah,
I
it's
think it will
probably
play better because again, just the density of backup is high enough.
yeah, it's going to be good. I think in any non-white black white deck, right? Like
Yeah.
the other ones. And yeah, you're probably right. It probably is closer to C plus than C minus.
So we have Knight of the New Coalition, 3 and a white for a human knight, 2/2 with vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. So 4 mana for 4/4 of stats with vigilance, with types. I gave it a C plus. I see it as an equally good card as the one that flips Phyrexians and they get bigger.
Yeah, I gave this a C minus. I think Call of the Cavalry, which is this exact same card basically from original Dominaria, was one of the best white commons in that set. But I think we live in a different era right now where, like, yes, you get 4/4 spread across 2 bodies, which is great. The literal best common in Chimney Rabble was also 4/4 across 2 bodies, but this one doesn't have haste. Now, I do think Vigilance is great, but Vigilance is great because it lets you attack. And how much does a 2/2 really be able to attack? So it's good on like empty boards, but I think boards are going to clog out, and I don't think it's going to be that great at pushing through to like attack battles, attack your opponent. Now, the one thing I'll say about it that it has going for it is that if you're able to get some of those knight synergies, this is double knight activations, which a lot of the knights we saw before really care about amassing a lot of knights. So I do think it's going to have a home in that deck. But because of that, I think it's going to be quite a niche card. I don't think it's going to be very good outside of white blue specifically, where you'd much rather be having, backup enabling or ways to augment your creatures or battles or whatever, literally any other card, basically. And so for that reason, I'm going to stick to my C minus on this one. I'm pretty confident about it, even though the card is like really good and would be the best common from, the set 5 years ago.
Like, the best part of our set review is that we literally put our numbers on a game in hand win rate. So after the set is going to, conclude or at least go to its end, we're going to be able to have this chat and we can actually put our grades onto the map and see how they panned out. So we are going to come back at the end of the format and chat about what we did wrong. In my case, probably a lot of things in the set review and discuss it. Next card we have Tiller of Flesh. 3 and a white for a Phyrexian Knight. It's a 2/4. Whenever you cast a spell that targets one or more permanents, incubate 2. I gave it a D. I don't know. I'm not a big believer in this card. You pay 4 mana for a 2/4, and you need other spells that you play to pimp it in a way. And I just don't think that lots of those spells that you want to be playing are the spells that you want to have in your decks. That's the thing. I mean, obviously you'll have some removal, but yeah, I'm you play a removal, you get an extra incubator token. I mean, I'm not that convinced about this card.
Yeah, it's definitely a build around. Now, one thing that is kind of a knock against it, and the reason it's like not higher for me, well, there's many reasons. 4 mana 2/4 is horrendous stats. You have that exactly right. But if you do have enough cards, and it also says it targets one or more permanents, right? So we're not necessarily saying like you need to play a bunch of pump spells to start getting incubate tokens. I much more see this as like you play this, it sits there, and anytime you play a removal spell, you're going to get an extra 2 to attach to it, which is kind of nice, especially if you're trying to be a lot grindier. Now, it does say spell, and so it is very, very awkward with some of these battles that come in and then have the effect to target something because it's not actually going to trigger this. So if it was like spell or ability, but obviously that'd be too good, right? Because then it would trigger off of like random equipments and things. So yeah, this is just way too good. All that being said, I still think like maybe it'll be like C- or in the D+ range, because when this card is going to be good, you're going to be like, this is just disgusting. But a lot of times it can be a 4 mana 2/4, and that's horrible. So obviously the truth lies somewhere in the middle, game to game, and how you build around it and the way that you draw your cards. I mean, I don't really know. And it's nice we're going to get to come back and look at it after the format, because I don't know how good this card's going to be. But it's C-, I think, most of the time. Is this me? I think it is. All right. Alabaster Host Intercessor. So 5 and a white for a 3/4 Phyrexian Samurai at common. And it says when it enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Alabaster Host Intercessor leaves the battlefield. And it has Plane Cycling 2. So a 6 mana 3/4 Fiend Hunter is pretty good. And has Plane Cycling 2, which is amazing. But 6 mana is a lot. And so there's those games where like you're holding this card in your hand and you're just waiting to get your removal online, and you're trying to get that 6 mana and then you play it. It doesn't really help with like your curve outs, whatever, but it does answer literally anything, which is pretty amazing. And so I think I'm probably too low on this card. I gave it a C, you gave it a B-. I think it probably is at least a C+ instead. But here's my reasoning why I don't think it's like Windmill Slam, like the best common you've ever seen, which I might have said a little while ago. First of all, I think there's just a million ETB effects. So if your opponent has a really scary creature that you have to deal with, and then you remove it, and then they kill this, they're going to get the ETB effect again. There's a pretty small knock against it because there's a ton of upside as well. If they ever have like Phyrexian tokens, they're gone, right? If you land this, they can't answer it with the ability on the stack. It's gone. If your opponent has a bunch of counters, at least when that creature comes back, the counters are gone. So that's pretty nice. And so that's why I said it probably actually is like closer to C+, but I think it's expensive. I think the plane cycling actually helps quite a bit, because if it's just rotting in your hand, it can actually help your curve outs. You were saying it's B-, and as I put down C when I graded this card, I felt bad inside, but I was just like, I don't know, maybe I think Magic Limited has changed, and until I start first picking this card 2 weeks into the format, I think it's closer to C+ than not.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, this card is sort of the Imperial Oath of the set. I mean, yeah, I know that there are different cards. I know
it's from
this
Kamigawa.
It is from Kamigawa, indeed. This is like a combination of the 5 mana Samurai and Imperial Oath, when you can put multiple copies of it in decks that don't have any business of being in white, and you can play them easily because one of them will basically fetch you the planes and the other ones will be able to do their job. I think it's like a pivotal card for some kind of a controlling archetype in this format, where you can just basically play a controlling archetype without even being heavy on white, because you have Alabaster host intercessors, which will fetch you the planes when the time is ripe for that. Ability is powerful. It deals with lots of stuff that won't come back ever, like the big incubate tokens being a good example. 4 toughness is actually quite a lot, so it will require a real solid uncommon level removal to get rid of that card as well. Plus, slight nudge up. It is a Phyrexian, and there is plenty of those Phyrexian synergy cards that we saw. It's like I like myself a curve topper in a deck where I can jam like 4 copies of it, because they will be always castable at some stage.
All right, yeah, it's definitely at least a C plus. You might be right on the B minus. I'm not quite there in terms of hot takes yet, but I'm definitely too low on C, so I'll admit that.
Cut short. Is it my turn now, or is it your turn? My turn. Cut short. 2 and a white for an instant. It has convoke. Destroy target planeswalker that was activated this turn or tapped creature. I mean, obviously, 99% of the time it will destroy a tapped creature. So for 3 mana, maybe with some discount, you can kill a tapped creature. You can do it after declaring blocks by tapping your creatures when you're even tapped out, which is a neat thing. I don't like this type of effect a lot, and that's why I didn't put it. Although, having said that, in the white deck with Samurais, that is a controlling deck, that would be actually quite a good card. I still put it on D, because I think people will just atrociously overplay it in their aggressive decks. But I'm pretty sure it's going to be decent in decks that are defensive. It's just I think that the stats on the card are going to be ruined by people playing it too often.
Oh, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I rated it sort of where I think the card actually is, and I think it only is like a mid-rangey control card. Like, you never want to put this card in your aggro deck. You can't even, kill things that are blocking, right? Because it's only tapped creatures. And historically, the problem with these types of cards, like any of the Divine Verdict type effects, even the cheaper ones that cost like 2 mana, is that you have to hold up mana. And then if your opponent just like doesn't make an attack that allows you to cast your card, it's just terrible. Or sometimes they're power based, so you like cast your spell and heaven forbid they pump their creature and blow you out. Like, that's horrible, and you often have to be reactive with it. But I see this card as like there's 2 different modes. One of them is just like they attack you, you cast it, maybe you discount it a little bit, and okay, you 1-for-1, no big deal. But I think there's going to be some board states where you're sort of building out your board, and your opponent finally has a ways they can attack. Maybe they like jump their creature in the air for the turn, or they engineer this whole scenario to remove a blocker, and now they're going to attack you to try to flip their battle, whatever. In those spots, the fact that you're tapped out, but really you have this convoke card just sitting there to blow them out, like, completely changes that entire combat to go from you losing to now you winning, or, you block in a way where your opponent then goes for a combat trick, but you look like you're tapped out, and now you actually get to kill their creature and their combat trick. So in some places where you actually got 2-for-1 with this type of effect, you now become the 2-for-1 E that is trying to turn the tides on your opponent. And I think that's incredibly powerful for potentially 0 mana. You just have to build in a way where you're putting creatures into play, but still being a control deck. I don't think that's that hard to do, though, because I think that's the way that limited design has gone over the last few years for the more controlling decks. Like, if we think about Imperial Oath being the curve topper, now that card was just great everywhere, but you're effectively controlling the game through power and toughness. And that often is going to be the case there. So I think it's a C in that case. I think it's like pretty powerful.
Yeah, I think that someone in the chat, Danilius, mentioned that there's also quite a large density of vigilance in this set, which is something to keep in mind. Because
really good vigilance for sure.
Well, but it's also bad if opponent has a lot of vigilance, because they don't tap.
Yes, that's true.
And there's 26 things that have some sort of vigilance enabling.
This is why you need the white common, right? You got your opponent. You're like, oh, my opponent has cut short. I better give my creature vigilance.
Inspired.
Yeah. Oh, go. You can read it again.
Yeah, go on.
Inspired Charge is 2 white for the instant common. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. We've seen this effect a million times. I give it a C-. You gave it D-. If boards build out, then it's a good way to win when you're ahead or at parity. It's really bad when you're behind. I think, the mana cost on these cards tends to not matter too much because it's usually like the last card you cast. And in certain spots it's good and the rest of the time it's bad. I don't know. That's kind of like a C- for me.
Yeah, I gave it a D- because I think in this format it just aligns badly. You don't have that much go white theme.
True. Yeah, I could see this card not being very good. But sometimes it'll be good.
Oh, yeah. And you remember those, and then you play the card, and then you lower its win rate, and I'm going to be right. Yay.
Yeah.
Go me. Here we have the opposite swing. Elsebut Smite, 1 mana for an instant, deals 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. You gave it a C+, I gave it a D. I don't like this type of effect in general. 1 mana, it's a good thing to happen to it, but I still think it's so situational and very often doesn't solve problems. I don't think it's going to be the sort of ships missing themselves in the night kind of format where this card maybe would have been better. There's going to be blockers all the time. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be as good. I might bump it into C- or something, but
Well, I agree. I hate this kind of effect. Like generally, like just don't put them in my deck, and my opponents always play it. And I'm like, that's great. I'm glad you're playing these cards and not me. But I think the 1 mana versus like 2 is just like night and day. We've seen that with the combat tricks, like how that completely changes the card. And 3 damage is usually gonna be enough to like, kill something that costs 2 or 3 mana. Now later it doesn't completely solve it, but if you have a first strike creature or something that can combo in a way to get the creature. But I think also it's not that hard to leave up 1 white, especially for like those awkward situations where your opponent does have one of those windrakes, which we think might be better in this set because you're trying to, attack battles, that kind of thing. And so just being able to leave up 1 white randomly, it's not that difficult. And even if they, smell the card coming, it's like, what are they really going to do about it? Not attack. All you have to do is leave up 1 white in certain spots. And it's just not that much of a price. And unlike the other one, this can work. Admittedly, I don't like it. These cards when you're the aggressor because your opponent gets to block, so you don't push damage. That being said, like, your opponent has their like annoying 2/3, and you have a bunch of 2/2s. You just attack with everything, and they block, and you didn't care what they blocked with. You lose a little damage, but you get the problem thing out of the way and keep expanding your board. So that's why I think it's going to be better than this effect normally is.
I don't think it's good. It might be better, but I don't think it's C+. It's quite a high grade for the common. I think that's like would be top 3 commons for in your list, I guess.
Yeah, it's certainly aggressive. It's probably closer to C. You're probably right, but I don't know.
We'll see. That's the only time. That's the only thing we can say. I mean, it's good to have discussions because two brains evaluate things differently, and it's interesting to see what goes on as the format unfolds.
I mean, I'd much rather have the +1/+1 combat trick we talked about, which I also graded C+. We both did. So for that reason, you're right. This is probably more like a C. But I think the fact that like this is the type of card where it's like early in the draft, let's say like it's a weak pack, maybe it's like picks 4 or 5 relatively, and you don't know whether you're aggressive or defensive. This is the type of card where like if you kind of be like, I have some white cards, but I don't know my direction yet, you can always just play this card and it's going to be fine. Whereas if you have a card that's like cut short, where we were looking at it, and you just need to play it in a purely defensive deck because you need to tap it to kill their tap creatures, this card doesn't have that problem. So in a way, it's like almost more of like a flex spot in the draft itself. Whereas in the final product, if you knew in pack 3 that you wanted like a specific type of card, then you always know, do you want the cut short or do you want the +1/+1 combat trick? And then you only take one or the other. So it could be interesting from the draft perspective as well.
Oh yeah, by the way, I mean I said it's a common, but it's actually uncommon. That just shows you how I grade the card. I just like looked at it and I said, yeah, that's a common, isn't it? Well, in fact, it is an uncommon. Yeah, time will tell. I'm not excited about this type of card, and that's probably reflecting my grade. Right, we're moving to blue in a second. I'll make myself more.
Can I take 2? Okay, yeah, we're both going to take 2.
We're both going to take 2, and we're going to come back and chat about blue.